Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Um, Looking forward to talking to you about ASPM 101, everything you never knew you wanted to know about application security posture management. I'm Brittany Greenfield, CEO and founder of Wabi. We're going to get started here in a minute. A few people are just still trickling in to our lobby. So thanks for holding with us. Thank you for joining us today. We're looking forward to really talking about application security posture management. It seems to be a term that, while not brand new, has sort of really been thrust into the spotlight in the application security arena. And it's because it's such a critical underpinning to today's modern application security programs. So let's take a step back and see how Gartner, who coined the term, really defines it. In that application security posture management analyzes security signals across software development, deployment, and operation to improve visibility, better manage vulnerabilities, and enforce controls. This allows leaders to improve application security efficacy and better manage risk. It's really important to look at the key words in this definition about signals, visibility, risk management, efficacy, because we're moving further and further away from just talking about testing to really what a holistic application security program relies on. But before we get to how we ended up here today, it's always important to go look at the history. So let's go back to sort of early days of DevSecOps, which really started with the shift left movement, right? Test early and often. Let's get security out of the hole. We're not testing until we have the code in deployment and move it back earlier. But the problem, as we all know, is that application security testing happens at various points in the life cycle. So what is earlier? Or which remained a question not necessarily resolved. However, the sentiment was absorbed as we then adopted DevOps more prominently in software development and noted that really it's not that linear, hey, you just have to shift it left, but you have to look at it in the whole context of the software development lifecycle, wherever you are on your DevOps journey. Nobody's really pure DevOps nowadays. So then we started seeing the introduction of the varying terms of DevOps Sec, right, which was that original place where security was still being implemented by 90% of organizations after code was already in production. And that was like saying, don't worry, I think we're secure because I did the thing and I put up a gate, right? It's like having a maximum security entrance where somebody can just drive around, right? That's not actually secure, even with the best of intentions. That's when we then saw the rise of DevSecOps, which was really about the integration of security into development testing, and which was a great step in the right direction. We saw a proliferation of tools to go secure DevOps tools. However, it wasn't really embracing the full nature of DevOps. So it was basically saying, don't worry, we're doing DevSecOps, but we haven't actually internalized any of the processes that truly define DevOps and modern software development. So it still left a lot of organizations, both on the security and development side, wanting for more in a DevSecOps initiative and not really getting to realize the promise of integrated security into DevOps, right? There's a reason that Sec was put into the middle of DevOps. And then we saw the term Sec DevOps emerge to really differentiate itself, say, look, it's not just about the tooling, but it's about the processes. As a development organization, we set processes to get code out, and we ship that code because we have followed the process. And when we haven't followed the process, we know, and we've made an educated decision about it. Security is not any different, right? We have processes to develop secure code, which is not necessarily locked up code, and we need to know that those processes have been followed. And if they haven't been followed, what happens next? However, we really actually ran into a hurdle because if you think about organizational structures, this was a great cartoon from many years ago, and I think it still always gets a good laugh. But for those that are familiar with Conway's Law, which says any organization that designs a system will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. We hadn't, when SecDevOps came to fruition, organizations still hadn't found a way to align their processes and their communication. We were still dealing with heavily siloed data, both on the development and security side, and no way to translate those processes. Because at the end of the day, security has a very different sense and accountability rules and governance rules that they need to meet than development does. Quite frankly, security lives in a very binary black and white world, bad stop, versus development, which makes educated decisions every day about what's good enough to let go. And so you really ended up with a little bit of a hairball from all of these DevSecOps tools and all of the stakeholders that hadn't been appropriately aligned in the SecDevOps movements. And it created just more commotion instead of actually solving the problem of how do you integrate security into the software development lifecycle. So organizations said, okay, hold on one second, let's put some brakes on, do not pass go, do not collect 200. And you saw in the market, the forecast, even though SecDevOps had been so hotly discussed, you actually saw a really big pullback because organizations couldn't actually execute on embedding DevSecOps practices into development teams. And even worse, they weren't able to incorporate the automated security scanning and configuration. Again, because they hadn't actually aligned their processes, therefore they couldn't integrate the two. So there was sort of this, it wasn't just a failure to achieve the promise of DevSecOps, but it was also a reticence to move forward because they hadn't implemented the right systems to support the tools and the data that were going to be brought in as part of this process integration between security and development teams. It's not enough to just say we integrated the tools. And that was the real moment people realized in the early 2020s that you got to take a step back and make sure the processes are integrated. So out of that, we saw the formation of a category called ASOC, Application Security Orchestration and Correlation, which really focused on how do we actually create that orchestration of the processes, calling out to the tools that both development and security teams use so that you could have a centralized database, rules applied consistently, and then if necessary, some kind of compliance and tracking around that. It really became what I like to think of as like those old telephone operators, right? It was that centralized layer that when somebody would say, hey, give me Pennsylvania 645, your ASOC layer would pop on these old phone plug boards, pop those around to make sure the right connection was made. And that was the first step in really finally enabling organizations to start to not just talk about DevSecOps practices and maybe have a more manual program or awareness around it, because we'd overcome the cultural hurdles, but really start to scale it. And this is why last year you actually saw Gartner include at ASOC as part of their hype cycle and as a transformative technology and a key enabler of DevSecOps, right? You can't do DevSecOps, which is that tool-based approach, if you don't have the orchestration of the process, which was the original initiative around SecDevOps. And more importantly, because we finally got this swell of demand for DevSecOps and people dipping their toes in this, you're going to see ASOC come to maturity. However, we then, beginning of this year, really start to talk about this idea of application security posture management. And that's taking ASOC to the next level, right? If you want to differentiate the two, so ASOC is sort of the worker bee, right? That's orchestrating each of those individual threads to make sure the process happens. And ASPM encapsulates that full process to say, hey, it's not just about, oh, at this point in time, you call out to a tool and you centralize it and correlate it. What you need to do is understand the process from the start. You need to categorize your application to understand what the security requirements are going to be. And those security requirements aren't just testing requirements. They could be policies, they could be approval workflows, they could be compliance schedules. You then have to actually push that information out to the right stakeholder at the right time. Good application security programs do have manual components to it, right? And sometimes that's all you need. Again, it's not just calling out to the specific tool, but when you do bring them back in, you have to assess them and say, in the context of this application, what does this vulnerability mean? And the world of application security isn't just limited to the traditional AST tools. It could be container security, it could be firewall configuration. Anything the application touches is part of an application security program, and the right person has to be informed at the right time to do that. And that then, by putting in these guardrails, when you have true application security posture management, you know the health of your application and whether or not it's met the standards. And therefore, you can start to automate the gatekeeping function to say, hey, rather than doing a security review at the very end, which if you go back to sort of the original DevOps sec and waterfall methodologies, there's been this game of follow the bouncing ball and what lint is on the bouncing ball and have the right approvals been taken. And maybe something that was okay in the singular is no longer acceptable in the aggregate by the time you go to authorize phase the application for release. And then monitoring is really critical here, not just to say, have we continue to do the tasks within the accepted time periods, but so that your security and development teams can continue to make changes on both sides and your program can dynamically respond to that. So let's sort of look at this a little more holistically as all the components that have come together as we've looked for this holy grail of actually finding the way to integrate security into development. We call bridging it the gap, because it's not just about force fitting security into development or forcing development to somehow meet these workflows. The true holy grail that ASPM has come to define, and we've been talking about for 5 years, is the fact that each team gets to continue to work in their existing workflows, but you get the benefits of de-siloed data and de-siloed processes. We're just making that translation. So what that means is that we're bringing 3 key components together: vulnerability management, which has always really been just, building block of good application security programs. And vulnerabilities aren't necessarily just anything that an AST comes back with, but it could also be, as I mentioned before, container security, or maybe even a manually dismissed policy, a pen test result, right? Got to take a broader lens on vulnerability management. The second is risk management, right? You can't secure everything. As I mentioned, secure code is not locked up code, but you have to make the decision about what risk you're willing to take on each application. And then the third is observability. This is where ASOC rolls into ASPM to be able to say, hey, we're not just getting a single pane of glass. We know all the components are being managed. When you bring these 3 together, the current definition and why we're all here today says that this is application security posture management. But we like to say those 3 pieces together is really about risk management by design, where you orchestrate to ensure that you have consistency and accountability in your application security program, but you're also transforming all of that data from both the development and the security side, so you can make educated decisions about how to move forward. So you no longer have to make the choice between security and velocity or agility. So let's dive into each of these areas. First, vulnerability management. Good vulnerability management is not just a better Excel spreadsheet. Vulnerability management includes having scheduled scans, right? Those can either be proactive. We've reached this point in our software development life cycle, and therefore we now, before the PR is completed, we will kick off our SAS scan. Or reactive. A certain class of vulnerability has been identified, and while we wouldn't typically run all 17 scans, we're now going to go kick off some additional scans. You also need to make sure that you are scoring those vulnerabilities in context of that application, right? You can't fix everything. In fact, people sort of recognize you can only probably fix about 5% of vulnerabilities. So you need to make sure you know which vulnerabilities matter for that application. This is also really critical as you apply SLAs and work to reduce the noise of security as part of the development ticketing systems and development workflows. Make sure when you take this application specific risk scoring, it allows you to start to manage vulnerabilities that need to be fixed as part of the existing backlog, since it won't create noise. And that's where we say no noise ticketing integrations. You're applying rules while you do have a centralized hub for all of your vulnerabilities that are returned, and they need to be correlated across the tools. So you're not creating a new record every time you scan for an existing vulnerability or every time you try it out on a new tool. But you need to then be able to apply an additional set of rules to say, these are the ones that I care about being fixed. And more importantly, here's when I care about them being fixed now. Is this a must fix now? Is this a can be fixed later? Or is this something that it needs to be monitored, but never pushed over into the ticketing system until some policy changes? The second area is risk management. And this is where you really need to start thinking about your application security policies. And it's really important. A lot of folks, especially in the context of vulnerability management, may say, oh, I have policies, I have logic workflows around this. That's just one piece of it. You need to be able to get down at not just a project level, but a feature level to understand the specific policies that embody the risk principles your organization is willing to take on for that application. That could be different kinds of firewall configurations. That could be even the steps, right? On a crown jewel application, you're not going to let the PR be completed, not just until the scan has been kicked off, but until all of the criticals have been fixed, right? So you need to really understand how your business risk profile matches your security risk for that application and that feature. This allows secure gatekeeping, as we talked about before. Really, it's not just the gatekeeping, but the guardrails, right? To say, on this application, here is the safe way to develop secure code and where we accept risk. And that also means that sometimes you have exception workflows, right? A policy and a risk management program is not just about avoiding risk, but sometimes accepting risk. So when you do accept risk, what is the correct way to accept that risk? Who has to do it? How long is it valid for? And what is the ultimate control on this? And all of this together allows you to actually have a prioritization of the security activities, right? You can't do everything. You can't lock up every application because you're trying to balance, for example, an account portal with customer experience. Sure, you could have a 16-digit password and make people VPN into it, but as an end consumer, you may not want to introduce that friction. And so that's really critical to say, how in this application are we going to prioritize all the security activities we do? Because on the other side, you might have some little beta app that you just want to get out there and it's internally facing and nobody's using it, but you want to be able to start to experiment. So this, again, is another key way that when you prioritize these security activities, whether it's a remediation, an initial policy, or just the testing, you understand what that risk profile. And the third is that observability, right? This is really where ASOC rolls into the vision of ASPM, or risk management by design. You can't scale an application security program, even if you had infinite resources, without this orchestration and correlation and centralization. But observability, as we know, taking this concept from the DevOps world, is about not just monitoring, right? Here's all of this data. It's about orchestrating the responses. So you want to be able to respond to signals both from the development and the security side. So that could be setting rules around changes in average API usage, or when different types of data tags change sensitivity layers. This is more about transforming that data into actionable insights, and sometimes even direct guided actions that somebody needs to take. And what this allows to do when you have this observability lens as part of your program, it empowers a dynamic management of your application security program. So when you have a new policy you want to roll out, or a change has been made on the development side, you don't have to go chase down a team and find out what it is. You can roll out with proper AppSec observability, you can roll out all of the changes to the impacted projects, right? One of our customers actually says her favorite thing is she never has to worry about her developers even knowing what standard they're developing for now, right? Because she has that dynamic management of their application security program, and she can push out the changes, make sure the right person knows the right information at the right time, and what action that they have to take and why they have to take it. So together, this application security posture management, risk management by design, whatever you want to call, is all about that transformation of the data that we have from our application security tools, our DevOps tools, our DevSecOps tools, into information. And information is, don't just tell me it's 70 degrees, right? Hey, well, where is it 70 degrees? Because if I say, hey, and we have a Texan on our team, that when he was here and it was 70 degrees, and he said, it's really cold, I should have brought my winter jacket, right? Versus in Boston, that's a beautiful summer day. And that's that context that you need. So when you have a proper platform to do this, you're going to get, in application security posture management, and not just a unified application security program, but context-based orchestration around your policy deployment, vulnerability management, your security gatekeeping, right? What are the standards for this one? Your posture management. Don't just tell me that everything's green or I have a lot of criticals, right? For this application, then rolled up at the organizational level, explain to me what my posture is. Am I taking care of the things that I care about? And am I monitoring the ones that aren't as urgent? And then that dynamic requirements management, right? That's really what any ASPM platform should bring to the table for your organization. Yeah. So how can you make sure you get this? Well, sometimes you have to look at the negative, because obviously when something's a hot topic, a lot of people like to adopt it. So you need to here are the questions that you can ask to make sure that you are getting context-based organization, and you don't end up with yet another point solution that's creating more noise, both for your security and development teams. So it's not an application security posture management tool if it has no SDLC awareness, right? This term is taking still a heavy security bent, but at the end of the day, ASPM is about merging processes. And if you can't see what's happening on the development side, on the software development lifecycle, then there's no way to actually merge the processes. You need a platform that is actually going to bridge that gap, and you need awareness on both sides' processes. The second is that if you can't manage risks separately at an application level, then it's not ASPM, right? How can you have posture management if you don't actually internalize what the risk profile is for that specific application? Often people may talk about being able to apply policies or rules at the business unit level, and they think that that's a translation to the application level, and that's just not the case. You need to have a way to get as granular, saying this application has this risk profile, and therefore here are all the policies that we're implementing to do that. The the third area is that if you can't create those inflection points in the SDLC, again, important to say, you know what's going on in the development process. And this is sort of almost that embodiment of the shift left mentality to say, we're willing to stop sometimes. It's not just about, DevOps isn't just about speed, it's about efficiency. And that means that you're willing to stop sometime when it means you're going to save time on the tail end, even if it feels slow. So if your platform doesn't have the ability to create those inflection points in the SDLC, you're still just going to get those overrides and end up with basically DevOps where you're still cleaning up or releasing because you don't have the visibility and you didn't have the opportunity to provide those guardrails and gatekeeping. And then most importantly, right, both security and development are living, breathing things. And so as those changes occur, whether they're manual or automated, both on the security and development side, your platform needs to be able to respond to them in real time so that code is always shipping in line with the most current standards. So just as we're coming up on time here, let's talk about 3 ways you can get started with ASPM. 1, do not boil the ocean. If you want to start small and pick one area to focus on, that doesn't mean you're not getting ASPM by just picking one area to focus on, like vulnerability management and gatekeeping or even policy deployment. It means that you are really truly analyzing the processes, because with so many years of manual processes, often we find with our clients that they actually don't have the process working the way that they want to. So pick your most urgent pain point and then grow from there. But you do still want a comprehensive ASPM platform rather than a lot of point solutions, because again, that will just contribute to the DevSecOps hairball. The second, it sort of really comes off of that and start to codify those processes. Excel is not any kind of ASPM tool, as hard as I know many of your organizations have made to work it as one. It's not scalable, it's lagging, and it's just never going to really be able to marry those workflows. And then the third is start to integrate. Don't be afraid early on to integrate with DevOps tools. That could be something as simple as just the ticketing system, but make sure you're getting that feedback about where you are in the life cycle of that application's development. That can, even if you start small with a single use case, that could manifest itself as, hey, were my policies attested to manually, maybe not even an AST scanner was implemented, and you're going to hold the PR. Or it could be, has this, integrating with your ticketing system to say, hey, has this vulnerability even been fixed before we agree to let it be released? So with that, I want to leave a few minutes for some questions, but really, as I said before, ASPM, which WABI has been founded around even before it was, before it was a term, when we were founded in 2018, is really about bridging that gap between security and development. How can you give security that accountability that they crave and need for compliance, while development gets the autonomy and really federation of responsibility of deploying application security? Because there's no way to scale an AppSec team if development doesn't have the opportunity to actually own some of those pieces. And the other side of that is you're never going to de-silo that information if you don't give development responsibility and then security feedback about what's happening in the software development lifecycle. So as you're on your journey, we'll actually be doing an ASPM 102 next month. So stay tuned for that. But please don't hesitate to reach out to us if we can be of assistance in helping you guide your application security posture management journey. So with that, we'll go and grab a few questions in our last couple of minutes. Okay, great question, right? I talked about starting small with some of the use cases. So let's go back here and I'll talk a little more tactically about 3 of the use cases. One is policy deployment. Policies are, what do you do to develop secure code? When do you do it? Who's responsible for it? And how do you control for it? And so that can be, it's not necessarily, it's separate from your standards, right? Policies are really the reflection of how you interpret the standards and apply them for your organization or application's risk level. But policy deployment can manifest itself in several ways. One, don't make your developers log into a different tool. They should be able to see their feature specific policies directly either on like their Jira ticket or in their IDE and be able to provide that feedback. Let's not give developers another tool to log into. So that's use case number one. The second is vulnerability management. And you'll certainly see a lot of vulnerability tools out on the market, but if they don't have this notion of a policy, even if it's not a developer implementing a policy, you're never going to be able to know what order they have to be remediated in or be able to rescore it in the context of that application. So even if right now you're not feeling great about starting with policies, you still have a sense of what your risk profile is. Do you care a high amount about availability on a certain application? Great. You want to rescore even a medium availability vulnerability, at the top of the list and make sure it gets fixed before release. The third area is that security gatekeeping. And I know there's always reticence to break the build. A really great ASPM platform, this is what we do as well, can actually just give you the reporting without breaking the build if you're not quite there culturally. So again, it's sort of that, do you follow can you follow the bouncing ball about what happened? Were the vulnerabilities fixed? Did the developers attest to the policy? And if you can either just get a report that says, yep, this meets our security standards and security is going to get that thumbs up, and then start to bridge that gap to, hey, now we're ready to start breaking the build. And that authorization, two other things on this. One, it doesn't have to just occur at release, right? I talked a lot about blocking a PR, for example, if a test hasn't been run or the developer hadn't completed his policy attestation. But also, you should make sure that you're able to set different environment tolerances and version tolerances. One, you want versions because you're going to accumulate security debt. Or maybe you're snapping into an existing project and you want to work your security debt down because you haven't had this centralized correlation, orchestration, observability in your AppSec program. The second are the environments. One of the common complaints from development is actually that security is slowing down our other kinds of QA tests. That's fine. You wouldn't have all your bugs fixed when you're still in QA. You should be able to set with your security gatekeeping, say, hey, it's okay. These vulnerabilities have been identified as the must fixes now. But we don't have to have them fixed while they're still in QA. However, we'll monitor the SLA, and if they're not fixed and there's not a green light from the platform, then we're going to block the build, or the report's going to say this is not authorized. So those are really the policy deployment, vulnerability management, and the security gatekeeping, where if you start small, it's not, you still have to have an ASPM platform that can provide that context. So you're not going to have to move tools when you just start getting over, but you don't have to try to do this whole process all at once. Right. Second question, that the SDLC awareness, and I sort of hit on it. You're right. Got it. So let me talk about what we mean about SDLC awareness and creating inflection points. Again, it goes to that a little bit of that notion, the security gatekeeping, right? A lot of organizations we speak with say 9 out of 10 times they just give the pass because they don't know what's happening, and right, they don't have that visibility. So right, remember that observability I talked about. They don't know the consistency, whatnot. But talking about it in the context of the SDLC is really critical, because if you don't know what's happening in the SDLC, there's no way they're ever going to be able to marry their processes into it. And security gatekeeping, I think, because of the manual nature so frequently today, is always seen as a release function versus, hey, are we willing to slow down now to go ahead and make sure we have this check and balance in place? And if needed, accept the risk early before it becomes an issue later, or fix the risk before it becomes an issue later. And that's why you really have to understand both sides of the process and have that awareness, if you're a security team, of what's going on in the SDLC. Hey, that's how you still get that velocity and agility to make sure that's happening. And should be able to automate that with workflows so you get consistency as well. Oh, great question about integrating with DevOps tools. So you don't have to go crazy on this, right? There's a whole range of DevOps tools. Start small, right? Ticketing system should be number one integration. That it's more about taking all the existing data, whether it's from development inside, right? You have those features defined. You have categories applied to the tickets that map to security policies. So start small with something like a ticketing system or your repo. I keep using the example of blocking a PR, or before you even get to one of your release management tools. But look at that from a maturity perspective, because as you get, once you start small, to come full circle on this, as you get that maturity in your application security process and are ready to take on more information, you could then even go to more of your APM tools, like for example, a Datadog. And if you have automation in there, or start to change and that changes, one of our customers changes tags on their data types, and we automatically roll out new policy sets. So look at all of those DevOps tools. We use the word signals a lot today, and those are other signals. It's not just threat intel from the AppSec side, or CVE score or whatnot. You have a lot of signals on the development side as well that can further propagate your application security program and bring more efficacy to it. That could be API usage. That could be, the world's your oyster on this. So think about a roadmap for your DevOps tools integrations as well, not just your security tools. Well, again, we're up on time, so I want to thank everybody for being here today. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me or the team directly if there's anything we can do or you have any follow-up questions. And also, if you want any of these slides, we're happy to share them with you. So take care, and we look forward to seeing you next time.